what are your plans for the off season and possibly playing or just doing individual workouts?
Yeah, I mean, probably take a little bit of a break here, just for maybe a week. I don't really want to lose a ton of the stuff I've worked on, and just trying to get my body back to full health.
Everyone thought the real story was about whether Caitlin Clark was good enough. Turns out that was never the question at all. The question that nobody in power wanted to answer was whether the people running USA basketball were actually working in her favor or doing everything they could to quietly make sure she stayed on the outside looking in. And now bit by bit, the whole thing is unraveling. A new head coach has stepped in. What's being exposed about how the staff treated Caitlin Clark behind the scenes is rattling the entire foundation of women's basketball in America. This isn't speculation. This is deleted tweets, explosive accusations from one of the most respected sports journalists in the country, a book that rocked the WNBA world, a coaching staff that stayed silent through every single second of the controversy, and a pattern of behavior so consistent and so damaging that once you see it clearly, it becomes impossible to look away. So let's go through every piece of this in order, because context matters here, and the full picture is way more disturbing than any single headline ever told you. Let's go back to the spring of 2024, because that's where the fuse was lit. Caitlin Clark had just finished the greatest college basketball career the women's game had ever seen. She was the all-time leading scorer in NCAA history. Men's or women's? No asterisk, no debate. She had dragged women's basketball into the mainstream almost single-handedly. Television networks were scrambling for her. Advertisers were paying enormous money to put her name next to their product. The casual sports fans who had never once sat down to watch a WNBA game were suddenly checking schedules every night to see when the Fever played. Indiana Fever took her first overall in the 2024 WNBA draft, and the entire sports world was watching. But while all of that was happening publicly, something quiet and deeply uncomfortable was already unfolding behind the scenes. Because Caitlin Clark was still in the Olympic selection pool, she was still being evaluated as a candidate for the 2024 Paris Olympic, and the head coach of Team USA was going on social media and appearing to take aim at the very player she was supposed to be evaluating fairly. On May 3, 2024, Cheryl Reeve, who was simultaneously the head coach of the Minnesota Lynx and the head coach of the United States women's national basketball team, posted on X, and the WNBA had put out a promotional post advertising a preseason game featuring Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever. Reeve reposted it, adding a pointed comment about her own Lynx team also playing that night, while noting that Lynx fans wouldn't even be able to watch because the game wasn't being televised. She followed that up by agreeing with a user who responded because they only care about Caitlin, and added the hashtag Thuizer, and just own player. Now, here's what you need to understand about why that matters so much. This wasn't a random fan on the internet. This was the sitting head coach of the national team, publicly airing grievances about the player who was actively being considered for the Olympic roster she controlled. USA Today columnist Christine Brennan called it exactly what it was on the Adam Gold show: stunningly bad behavior. She asked a question that cut to the bone. How on earth is it okay with the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee and USA Basketball that their coach is actively posting on social media about someone who is in the selection pool? Nobody answered that question. Not USA Basketball, not the Olympic Committee, not Jen Rosati, the chair of the selection committee. Nobody. And what happened next only made the silence worse. When reporters tried to get clarity from Reeve about her treatment of Clark, the response was explosive in a completely different way. ESPN's Myron Medaf asked Reeve before a Lynx Fever game about Clark's future with national teams. Reeve snapped back, "Why the hell would I answer a national team question? I'm wearing Lynx, and I'm the head coach of the national team, but I'm not the chair of the committee." She shut it down completely. No engagement, no explanation, no attempt to reassure anyone that the process was being handled with integrity. Just a sharp dismissal and a pivot away from any accountability. And then those May 3rd posts disappeared. Reeve's tweets were deleted, which anyone with a functioning memory knows is the clearest possible signal that a person knows they said something they shouldn't have. Erasing your words doesn't undo them. It just tells the world you understand why they were a problem. If there was any remaining doubt about whether the atmosphere around Caitlin Clark's evaluation was being compromised, the Olympic roster announcement erased it. Clark's name wasn't on it. So, the most famous player in women's basketball, the rookie whose arrival had already broken television rating records, left off entirely. That wasn't the whole story. Not even close. The official explanation from Selection Committee Chair Jen Rosati was that the decision came down to basketball criteria, position, and style of play for Coach Cheryl Reeve. That last part deserves to be read twice. Style of play for Coach Cheryl Reeve. Very same coach who had just posted about Clark on social media during the selection window. The very same coach who had deleted those posts. Rosati told the Associated Press that sometimes it comes down to position, style of play for Cheryl, and then sometimes a vote. So, the idea that Reeve had absolutely zero influence on who made or didn't make that roster, which became the central argument of her defense, was undercut by the committee chair's own words. Brennan hammered this point relentlessly. She said the behavior had never been properly addressed by those in power. She pointed out that it should have been immediately stopped by the leadership of those organizations the moment it began. And it never was, not once. The fan backlash that followed Clark's exclusion was unlike anything women's basketball had ever produced. Millions of people who had just discovered the sport through Clark felt like they were watching an institution punish a player for being too popular, too bright, too impossible to ignore. And Reeve, at the center of all of it, stayed quiet for months. So when she finally did speak, she went on the Good Game with Sarah Spain podcast in September 2024 and made a stunning admission. She said the head coach of the national team truly has no power in the selection of the team, using the example of her own link player, Kayla McBride, being cut from the 2022 World Cup roster despite Reeve believing she'd earned a spot. She framed it as proof that even she wasn't immune from the committee's decisions. But then she said the part that changed everything. She admitted, "I took a lot of bullets for USA Basketball. No, this is a unique time. I took a lot of bullets, but it is what it is." Read that carefully. She wasn't saying she was wrongly blamed. She was saying she absorbed the punishment on behalf of USA Basketball for a decision that went sideways, and the organization she was absorbing those bullets for. Total silence. Not a single public statement of support, not one expression of concern about the process, not even a vague acknowledgement that anything unusual had occurred. The governing body of American women's basketball let it own coach take every hit while they stood behind a wall of quiet, and that dynamic, one person exposed, the institution protected, would define everything that came next, because the story didn't stay buried. The summer of 2025, Christine Brennan published her book on her game, Caitlin Clark and the Revolution in Women's Sports. The book detailed Reeve's behavior leading into the 2024 selection process with a specificity that was impossible to dismiss. Brennan had tried to reach Reeve 4 separate times across June 2024, July 2024, August 2024, on and February 2025, texted her directly, called her PR people, went through USA Basketball's communications team multiple times. Every single time Reeve either declined to comment or didn't respond at all. When the book was released and started making waves, Reeve came out swinging. She called Brennan's reporting fiction. She said, "Christine Brennan likes to have a villain in her storytelling. I am Christine Brennan's villain. That's the sword she's going to die on." But Brennan didn't flinch. She went right back to her social media and posted screenshots of the deleted tweets, the actual posts that had been wiped from the internet so the public could see exactly what had been written. She pointed out that she had offered Reeve for separate opportunities to respond and explain, and she asked the only question that mattered. If what she wrote was fiction, why had the tweet been deleted? Reeve's credibility problem was growing by the day, and through all of it, USA Basketball remained completely silent. Meanwhile, there was a separate tension brewing that flew under the radar for most people who were locked in on the Reeve drama. Stephanie White, Caitlin Clark's head coach at the Indiana Fever, had been named to the Team USA staff as an assistant. On paper, that sounded like good news for Clark. Someone in her corner, someone who knew her game on the sideline of the national team. But fans started picking up on something strange almost immediately. Photos of Clark and White together generated viral reactions, not because of warmth or obvious chemistry, but because of what seemed to be missing in. Users noted that Clark appeared visibly subdued or uncomfortable in images alongside White. Posts flooded in from fans who said they couldn't explain it exactly, but that something felt off between the two. Then Clark's 2025 WNBA season became a disaster of a different kind. She suffered 4 separate muscle injuries across the season and played only 13 games. She was never fully healthy. She was rarely the player who had lit up arenas as a rookie, and the questions about whether she was being managed properly, whether the people around her were making the right calls about her workload, her recovery, her deployment were never fully answered. She was ruled out for the remainder of the regular season on September 4th. Her first game had been in July, the whole summer gone. By September 2025, the USA Basketball made an announcement that felt to many like the beginning of a reckoning. Cara Lawson, the head coach of Duke women's basketball, who had served as an assistant at the 2024 Olympics and the 2022 FIBA World Cup, was named as the new head coach of the U.S. women's national team through the 2028 Olympics, and the difference in tone was immediate. Where Reeve's era had been defined by deleted posts, public feuds with journalists, and a coaching staff that refused to say anything meaningful about the most talked about player in the sport, Lawson came in and started saying Caitlin Clark's name like it meant something. She praised her dynamic playmaking. She called her one of the most electric players in the world, as both a scorer and a distributor, and she said it was an exciting day when Clark got to make her debut for the national team. For Clark fans, it felt like exhaling after holding your breath for 2 years. But the first real test was still coming, and when it arrived, it set off a reaction nobody had fully anticipated. In March 2026, Team USA traveled to Puerto Rico for the FIBA Women's World Cup qualifying tournament. The World Cup itself, set for Berlin that September, was already locked up. USA Basketball had qualified the previous summer by winning the Women's America Cup. So, Puerto Rico was about chemistry, evaluation, and reps. But for millions of people watching, it was about one thing: Caitlin Clark's return. She hadn't played a single competitive game in 239 days. Her last appearance had been July 15, 2025, and when she strained her right groin, playing against the Connecticut Sun. After that, 4 muscle injuries, a wrecked season, and 8 months of silence. Her comeback was one of the most anticipated moments in women's sport. Every network wanted to be there, every fan base was watching, and when Team USA lined up for their opening game against Senegal, Caitlin Clark was not in the starting 5. She was coming off the bench. The internet exploded. Hosts poured in from every direction. Absolutely disgraceful. They are intentionally keeping her on the bench. She is the best point guard in the nation, and they treat her like this. Fans who had lived through the Olympic snub 2 years earlier felt like they were watching the same script play out on a new stage. The outrage was completely real. But here's where you have to pump the brakes in, because what Clark actually did coming off that bench stopped every argument cold. In 19 minutes against Senegal, Caitlin Clark put up 17 points on 4 of 5 shooting and 12 assists. 12 assists. That number was the second highest assist total in the entire history of the qualifying tournament. She was scoring, creating, pushing the tempo, setting up her teammates for clean looks, doing everything a franchise player does, only doing it in under 20 minutes with an efficiency that made everyone else on the floor look like they needed to catch up. And Cara Lawson did not hide from the cameras after that game. She came out, faced the media, and explained the decision directly. She said Clark was the leader of the second unit, the offensive spark plug, the player who was brought in to generate bursts against tired opposing starters. And she said, Caitlin brings this dynamic play to the offensive end. Much as she is dynamic as a scorer, she's one of the most dynamic playmakers in the world as well. And Clark herself, she was more measured than anyone had a right to expect. She said, "This is a different stage. You're not going to come out here and be the star player. That's not how it's going to be for USA Basketball. That kind of self-awareness doesn't come from a player who feels disrespected. That comes from a player who has been communicated with, valued, and trusted." But what happened next would shift the narrative one more time, because game after game, the debate kept smoldering. Chelsea Gray, 6-time All-Star, 4-time WNBA champion, battle-tested international player, kept getting the starting point guard spot, while Clark kept coming off the bench. Combined across the first 2 games against Senegal and Puerto Rico, Clark had 25 points and 14 assists. She was clearly one of the most impactful players on the roster. And still the conversation refused to settle. Stephanie White was on the sideline as an assistant coach. Every interaction between White and Clark was being filmed and dissected. Every expression, every exchange, every moment of body language was being run through the same filter fans had been applying since the Fever season ended. It was relentless. But in Game 4 against New Zealand, the script shifted. Clark got her first career start for the senior national team and she delivered 14 points on efficient shooting. The assists setting the tone from the opening tip. Then came Spain in the final game, the one real test of the tournament, and the Spaniards had just earned a silver medal at Eurobasket. They had dangerous prospects who were fighting for their own draft positioning.